I am Samantha Wilson, 32 years old, and I never expected to make such a dramatic entrance at my own father's birthday party. When they seated me on the patio like an afterthought, I swallowed my pride and smiled. My brother James always said the patio was where failures belonged. Little did they know my emergency business meeting would require a helicopter landing right on their perfectly manicured lawn. Before I tell you how my helicopter landing changed everything, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, and subscribe if you want more stories about standing your ground in toxic family situations. Growing up in the Wilson family meant living in a beautiful mansion with every material comfort imaginable. But emotional warmth was a luxury we could not afford. My father, Robert Wilson, built his real estate empire from the ground up, and he expected nothing less than perfection from his children. Unfortunately, his definition of perfection always seemed to align with whatever my brother James did. From the beginning, it was clear that James was the golden child. He was 4 years older than me, and in my father's eyes, he could do no wrong. When James brought home a B+, my father would take him golfing as a reward. When I brought home straight, as I received a distracted nod and a reminder that academic success is expected in this family. My mother Margaret witnessed this favoritism, but never challenged it. She was the perfect corporate wife, elegant, socially connected, and completely deferential to my father. Whenever I would try to talk to her about the obvious preferential treatment, she would say things like, "Your father just connects with James differently," or, "Men relate better to sons. It is just nature." These dismissals hurt more than outright rejection, because they came wrapped in the guise of explanation rather than comfort. By the time I reached high school, I had accepted that I would never be the favorite child. James followed my father's footsteps, studying business at my father's alma mater, and joining Wilson Properties immediately after graduation. I, on the other hand, found myself drawn to technology and innovation. When I announced my intention to study computer science instead of business, my father looked at me as though I had declared I wanted to become a street performer. "Technology is just a fad," he said dismissively at the dinner table. "Real wealth is in land and buildings, things you can touch." James smirked across the table. "Let her play with computers, Dad. Someone has to fix our office equipment." That comment burned, but it also fueled me. While I was at MIT, I developed a property management software that integrated artificial intelligence to predict market trends and optimize rental pricing. Ironically, it was exactly what the real estate industry needed. But when I tried to explain it to my father, his eyes glazed over before I finished my pitch. "That is nice, Samantha," he said, checking his watch. "But if you ever want a real job, Wilson Properties always needs administrative assistance." James laughed outright at that one. "Perfect fit for her skills, Dad." Instead of joining the family business, I secured venture capital funding and launched my own tech company, Property AI. The early years were challenging. I worked 18-hour days, ate ramen noodles despite having access to a trust fund, and reinvested every penny of profit back into the company. During this time, my family's dismissal of my career choice evolved from amusement to concern. "When are you going to stop playing entrepreneur and settle down?" my mother would ask during our monthly phone calls. My father was more direct. "This startup nonsense is just postponing your real life, Samantha." James was the cruelest, often introducing me at family gatherings as my sister, who thinks she is the next Steve Jobs, but without the success. These interactions made my father's birthday celebrations particularly difficult. Every year, Robert Wilson hosted an extravagant party to mark another year of his success. These events were less about celebrating my father and more about showcasing the Wilson family achievements to their social circle. My father would give a speech highlighting the family's accomplishments for the year, which invariably focused on James's deals and contributions to Wilson Properties. One year, when Property AI had just secured its first major client, I mentioned it during dinner. My father nodded politely before immediately turning to James to discuss his recent acquisition of a downtown office building. The message was clear: my achievements existed outside the realm of what my family considered success. Despite these experiences, a part of me still craved their approval. Each year I would attend these birthday celebrations with renewed hope that this would be the year they recognized my accomplishments. And each year I left feeling smaller and less significant than when I arrived. Over the past 5 years, Property AI had grown from a startup with 3 employees to a company valued at over $100 million. We had offices in 3 cities, a team of 70 talented individuals, and a client list that included some of the largest property management companies in the country. My success spoke for itself, but somehow within the walls of my family home, I was still the little girl who had chosen the wrong path. The invitation to my father's 65th birthday arrived on a Tuesday. The heavyweight cream envelope, with embossed gold lettering, sat on my desk like a beautiful harbinger of emotional turmoil. My assistant Rachel placed it prominently atop my morning reports, knowing that anything from my family took precedence, at least in terms of my attention, if not my affection. "Another Wilson extravaganza?" Rachel asked, lingering by my desk. After 5 years as my right hand, she knew the complicated relationship I had with my family. I sighed, running my finger along the sealed edge of the envelope. "Dad turned 65 this year. Milestone birthday. Are you going to attend?" Her question was gentle, but direct. I hesitated. Last year's party had been particularly difficult. Property AI had just been featured in Forbes as one of the top tech companies to watch, and not a single family member had mentioned it. Instead, I endured 3 hours of James boasting about a property deal that my software could have analyzed and optimized in minutes. "I am not sure," I admitted. "I have that investor meeting in Seattle around the same time." Rachel checked her tablet. "The meeting is 2 days after the party. You could do both." She was right, of course. The scheduling was not the issue. It was the emotional cost that gave me pause. Every interaction with my family left me feeling drained and inadequate, no matter how successful I was in the outside world. That afternoon, everything changed. Our development team finalized an algorithm that could predict property value changes based on infrastructure developments and demographic shifts with 97% accuracy. This breakthrough would revolutionize how investment firms approached real estate portfolios. Within hours of the announcement, our stock jumped 15%, and my phone began ringing with calls from investors who had previously been on the fence. In that moment of professional triumph, I made a decision. I would attend my father's birthday party, not as the seeking approval, but as the successful CEO I had become. I called my mother to RSVP. "Samantha, darling," she answered, her voice carrying the practiced warmth she reserved for social calls. "How lovely to hear from you." "I am calling about Dad's birthday party," I said. "I will be attending." "Oh, wonderful. Your father will be so pleased. He was just saying to James how he hoped the whole family would be there." I doubted my father had expressed any particular desire for my presence, but I let the comment slide. "Is there anything specific I should bring as a gift?" "Just yourself, dear," she replied automatically. "Though James is arranging for a vintage bottle of Macallan 1966, your father's birth year. Very thoughtful." The hint was about as subtle as a sledgehammer. My brother's gift would be perfect as always. I thanked her for the information and ended the call already planning a gift that would be both personal and impressive. The next 2 weeks flew by in a blur of preparation. I selected a understated but elegant black dress from a French designer, simple yet sophisticated jewelry, and commissioned a custom-made leather-bound album containing photographs of all the properties my father had developed. Throughout his career, with current valuations and impact analyses generated by Property AI, it was a perfect blend of sentiment and business acumen that I hoped would finally speak to him in a language he understood. As the day approached, my confidence began to waver. I called my best friend Natalie, the only person who truly understood the complexity of my family dynamics. "What if nothing has changed?" I asked her during our video call. "What if they still see me as the family disappointment?" Natalie, direct as always, raised an eyebrow. "Sam, You run $100 million company that is revolutionizing the very industry your father works in. If they cannot see your value, that is their blindness, not your failure. I know that logically, I admitted, but family has a way of bypassing logic and hitting you right in the childhood insecurities. Then remember this, she said firmly. You are not going for their approval anymore. You are going because you are confident enough in who you are to face them on your terms. Those words became my mantra as I prepared for the party. I was not seeking validation. I was confident enough to face them on my terms. The morning of the party arrived with perfect weather, as if even the elements knew better than to disappoint Robert Wilson on his birthday. I arranged for my driver to take me to my parents' estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. As we drove through the wrought iron gates and up the long, winding driveway, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest that always accompanied visits home. The estate looked immaculate as always. Gardeners had clearly been working overtime to ensure every flower was in bloom and every hedge perfectly trimmed. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, a silent testament to the wealth and status of the guests inside. I took a deep breath, adjusted my dress, and stepped out of the car, gift in hand armor of accomplishment, wrapped invisibly around me. The double doors to my childhood home opened to reveal a scene of calculated opulence. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, reflecting light onto the marble floors below. Waitstaff, in crisp uniforms, circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvre, navigating expertly through the crowd of well-dressed guests. A string quartet played in the corner, adding a soundtrack of refinement to the occasion. I spotted my mother immediately, her silver hair styled perfectly, her posture impeccable, as she greeted guests with practiced charm. She saw me and waved, excusing herself from a conversation to approach me. "Samantha, you made it," she said, air-kissing near both my cheeks, "and right on time." This was our family code for not fashionably late, a subtle dig at my tendency to prioritize work over social punctuality in the past. I let it slide. "Happy to be here," I replied, with a smile that felt only slightly forced. "Where should I put Dad's gift?" She gestured toward a table, already piled high with elegantly wrapped packages, over there with the others. James arranged for a special display for the more significant gifts from immediate family and close friends. I nodded and placed my carefully crafted album among the other presents, noting that my brother had positioned his Macallan front and center, complete with a large bow and a card that was conspicuously visible. "Where is Dad?" I asked, scanning the room. "In the study with the Morgans. You know how Richard always wants to discuss the market." My mother linked her arm through mine, steering me toward the main reception room. "Now let me show you to your seat before the dinner announcement." I followed her through the house, nodding and smiling at familiar faces along the way. Most were business associates of my father, with a sprinkling of relatives and longtime family friends. My mother led me not to the main dining room where tables were being set up, but toward the back of the house. "We have quite a large group this year," she explained as we walked. "Your father invited some important potential clients, so we had to get creative with the seating." A sense of dread began to form in the pit of my stomach as we approached the French doors leading to the patio. Outside, I could see a few tables set up, looking decidedly less formal than the elaborate settings visible in the main dining room. "The patio?" I asked, unable to keep the disbelief from my voice. My mother had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "We had to make some adjustments. The main tables filled up with your father's business associates and their spouses." "And James, I assume?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "Well, of course James is at the main table. He works directly with these people, Samantha." Her tone suggested this explanation should be entirely sufficient. Before I could respond, a familiar voice cut through the air. Little sister finally made it to the party. James approached, champagne in hand, looking every bit the successful heir in his tailored suit. At 36, he had our father's commanding presence, without the softening effects of age. James I acknowledged with a nod. "Congratulations on the West Side development. I heard it closed last month." He looked momentarily surprised that I knew about his recent deal but recovered quickly. Thanks. It was a complex negotiation, but that is what we do at Wilson Properties. Real deals, real buildings. He glanced toward the patio and smirked. I see Mom showed you to your seat. The patio is nice this time of year. The patio seems a bit removed from the main celebration, I observed, keeping my tone neutral. James did not bother with such restraint. The patio is for failures, Sam. People who are not essential to the Wilson legacy. He took a sip of champagne, watching me over the rim of his glass. Dad had to make some tough choices about who gets a seat at the main table. The insult was so blatant that even my mother looked uncomfortable. James, that is not what I said at all. We simply had space limitations. In a 7,000 square foot house, I asked incredulously. My mother flushed. You know what I mean, Samantha. Your father wanted certain people close by. And I did not make the cut. I understand perfectly. I forced a smile. The patio will be fine. James patted my shoulder condescendingly. Don't worry. We will save you some cake. With that, he turned and walked back to the main reception area, leaving my mother and me in uncomfortable silence. Samantha, she began, but I cut her off. It is fine, Mom. Really. It wasn't fine, but years of similar treatment had taught me when to pick my battles. She seemed relieved at my apparent acceptance. The patio guests will be served the same menu, and the weather is lovely. With that weak justification, she excused herself to attend to other guests, leaving me standing alone at the threshold between the house and the patio. I stepped outside to survey my designated area. 3 tables were set up, each with seating for 6. The settings were nice but noticeably less elaborate than those inside. The tables were occupied by a mix of distant relatives, friends, who had fallen out of my father's favor, and a few people I did not recognize. At one table sat my second cousin Bethany, who had caused a family scandal by divorcing her husband and opening a yoga studio instead of following her parents into law. At another was my father's college friend Thomas, who had once asked for an investment in a business that ultimately failed. The third table had an elderly aunt who was hard of hearing, and her caregiver, along with 2 empty seats that I assumed were for me and whoever was unfortunate enough to be my dining companion. The symbolism was unmistakable. This was the table for those who had disappointed the great Robert Wilson in some way, or simply did not matter enough to merit his direct attention. I took my assigned seat, smiling at my table mates and introducing myself. Inside, through the floor to ceiling windows, I could see the main event unfolding. My father had arrived in the dining room and was greeting guests with James at his side, both men looking remarkably similar in their expensive suits and confident postures. They moved from person to person, my father introducing James to everyone as my son and executive vice president of Wilson Properties. A waiter appeared on the patio, offering champagne to the outdoor guests, almost as an afterthought. I accepted a glass, taking a larger sip than etiquette would recommend. The familiar feeling of invisibility washed over me, the same feeling I had experienced at countless family events throughout my life. Part of me wanted to leave, to walk out, and never look back. I had a successful company, financial independence, and a life entirely separate from the Wilson family dynamics. There was no practical reason for me to stay and endure this subtle humiliation. But another part of me, the part still connected to the little girl, who had once desperately wanted her father's approval, kept me rooted to my chair. I had come here today to show them who I had become, not to retreat at the first sign of disrespect. I would stay, maintain my dignity, and perhaps find an opportunity to demonstrate that seating me on the patio did not diminish my achievements in the slightest. Little did I know that opportunity would arrive sooner, and more dramatically than I could have imagined. The first course had just been served when my phone vibrated in my clutch. Normally, I would ignore calls during family events, a lesson learned after years of disapproving glares from my parents. However, Rachel knew I was at my father's birthday, which meant this call would only come through if it was genuinely urgent. Excusing myself from the table, I stepped to a quiet corner of the patio and answered. "Sam, I am so sorry to interrupt," Rachel began, her voice tense. "But Marcus Reynolds is on the other line." Marcus Reynolds was the CEO of Urban Development Partners, one of the largest property development firms in the country. We had been courting them as clients for months, with our team preparing detailed proposals demonstrating how property AI could optimize their portfolio. "What does he want?" I asked immediately, shifting into business mode. "He wants to sign with us today. Their board just approved an emergency acquisition of a major property group in Chicago, and they need our predictive analytics to evaluate the assets before finalizing." My heart raced. This was potentially the biggest client in our company's history. "That is fantastic news. Send him the contracts electronically, and tell him we will begin work immediately." "That is the issue," Rachel explained. "He says their legal team requires in-person signatures for deals of this magnitude. He is at their retreat in the Berkshires, only about 40 minutes from your location. He says if you can get there by 6 p.m., they will sign today and wire the first payment tonight. Otherwise, they will have to go with a competitor who can meet their timeline." I checked my watch. It was 4:30, and the formal dinner was scheduled to last until at least 8, followed by speeches and cake. There was no way I could excuse myself, drive to the Berkshires, and return without missing most of my father's celebration. "Have you checked for available transportation options?" I asked, already calculating the consequences of leaving the party early. "That is why I called, rather than texted," Rachel replied. "There is no car service that can guarantee arrival by 6 given the weekend traffic." But she hesitated slightly. "The company helicopter is available. The pilot says he could land at your parents' property and have you at the Reynolds retreat in 20 minutes. A helicopter landing in the middle of my father's meticulously orchestrated birthday party. The thought was simultaneously horrifying and oddly satisfying. "The estate has enough space," I said, thinking of the expansive lawn behind the house, "but landing a helicopter here would cause quite a disruption." "It is a $30 million contract," Rachel reminded me, "with potential for expansion to their entire portfolio." She was right. In business terms, the decision was clear. This opportunity was too important to miss, regardless of the social implications. "Arrange it," I decided. "Have the pilot aim for 5:15. That gives me 15 minutes to explain to my family and 45 minutes for travel and contract review before the deadline." "Already on it," Rachel confirmed. "The pilot will call for exact landing coordinates in 20 minutes. After ending the call, I returned to my patio table, mind racing. The other guests were discussing local real estate trends, a conversation I could easily have dominated, but instead contributed to minimally as I contemplated how to announce the imminent arrival of a helicopter on the lawn. Inside, through the windows, I could see my father holding court at the main table, James at his right hand, both men gesturing animatedly as they spoke. My mother sat beside them, smiling and nodding at appropriate intervals. They looked like a picture-perfect family, complete without me. The event coordinator, a professionally cheerful woman named Patricia, was circulating through the dining room, ensuring everything ran smoothly. I caught her eye through the window and motioned her over. When she stepped onto the patio, I pulled her aside. "Patricia, I need to inform you of a situation. I have an emergency business meeting, and my company helicopter will be landing on the back lawn in approximately 40 minutes. Her professional composure faltered for just a moment. "A helicopter? During Mr. Wilson's birthday dinner?" "Unfortunately, yes. It is unavoidable. A $30 million contract requires my immediate attention." She blinked rapidly, mental calculations visible behind her eyes. "I will need to inform security and make sure the landing area is clear. Mr. Wilson should also be notified immediately." "I will tell my father," I assured her. "Could you please handle the logistics? The pilot will call soon for exact landing coordinates." Patricia nodded, her training reasserting itself. "Of course, Miss Wilson. I will make the necessary arrangements discreetly." As she hurried away, I steeled myself for the conversation ahead. Walking into the main dining room felt like crossing an invisible boundary, the temperature seemingly dropping as heads turned to notice my intrusion from the patio. I approached the main table conscious of every eye tracking my movement. My father paused mid-sentence. As I reached him, his expression, a mixture of surprise and mild annoyance at the interruption. "Samantha, is something wrong with the patio seating?" he asked, voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "Everything is fine, Dad," I said, keeping my voice low. "But I needed to let you know I have an emergency business situation. My company helicopter will be landing in the back garden in about 30 minutes to take me to a client meeting." The silence that followed was profound. James recovered first, laughing, as though I had delivered a punchline. "Your helicopter," he repeated incredulously. "Coming here." My father's expression remained impassive. "Surely whatever this is can wait until tomorrow, Samantha. We are in the middle of a celebration." "It cannot wait," I replied firmly. "It is a $30 million contract with Urban Development Partners that requires my in-person signature by 6 p.m. My mother looked distressed. "But darling, you will miss the cake and your father's speech." "I understand that, and I am sorry. But this is a crucial moment for my company." I turned to my father. "I thought you would appreciate that I am prioritizing business even on a family occasion." It was a calculated statement appealing to the value he had always placed on business commitments. His expression flickered with something unreadable before settling back into neutrality. "If you must go, you must go," he said finally. "Though I cannot imagine what kind of business cannot wait for a few hours." James snorted. "Probably some minor software update she's calling a contract." He made air quotes with his fingers. "I doubt it's actually important." I refused to take the bait. "Patricia is handling the logistics with your security team. The helicopter will land on the far side of the lawn to minimize disruption." Without waiting for further comments, I turned and walked back to the patio, feeling a mixture of anxiety and a strange sense of liberation. For the first time, I was prioritizing my business over family expectations without apology. Back at my table, I checked my phone to find messages from both the pilot confirming approach time and from Rachel sending the final contract details. As I reviewed the documents, I could not help but reflect on the irony of the situation. For years my family had dismissed my business as insignificant, and now that very business was dramatically interrupting my father's carefully orchestrated party. Through the windows I could see Patricia speaking with my father, likely explaining the helicopter arrangements. Security personnel were now visible, moving toward the back lawn to prepare for the landing. A few guests had noticed the unusual activity, heads turning in curiosity. James was watching me from the main table, his expression a mixture of disbelief and disdain. When our eyes met, he raised his champagne glass in a mock toast, before turning back to continue a conversation with the important guest beside him. The minutes ticked by, with excruciating slowness. I found myself remembering all the times my achievements had been minimized or ignored by my family. The science fair project that won state recognition, but wasn't practical enough for my father's praise. The full scholarship to MIT that was acknowledged with a distracted, "That's nice," while James's acceptance to our father's alma mater warranted a celebratory dinner. The launch of Property AI, which my father had dismissed as playing with computers even as we secured our first $1 million in funding. Now that same computer play was about to make a very tangible, very visible entrance into their world. Part of me felt guilty for disrupting my father's birthday. Another part, the part that had swallowed disappointment for decades, felt a grim satisfaction. My phone buzzed again. A text from the pilot, 5 minutes to arrival. Please confirm landing area is clear. I replied affirmatively, having seen security finish, cordoning off the designated area. Then, taking a deep breath, I stood and made my way toward the back lawn, aware that my journey from the patio to the landing site would take me directly past the main dining room windows. This time I walked with purpose, no longer feeling like an intruder but like the CEO I had become. The timing could not have been more dramatic if I had planned it. Just as my father rose to begin his birthday speech, the distinctive whump, whump, whump of helicopter blades became audible in the distance. At first it was just a faint rhythm competing with the string quartet, but it quickly grew louder, impossible to ignore. I stood on the edge of the back lawn watching the skies. My father's voice faltered mid-sentence as the sound penetrated the dining room. Through the large windows, I could see confusion ripple across the guests' faces, followed by a collective turning of heads toward the source of the interruption. The sleek black helicopter, with the Property AI logo, emblazoned in silver on its side, appeared over the tree-lined sunlight, glinting off its windows as it approached. The pilot executed a perfect descent, hovering momentarily before settling gracefully onto the lawn about 100 yards from the house. The rotor wash sent flower petals swirling from nearby gardens, creating an unintentionally theatrical effect. As the engine wound down and the blades slowed, an almost complete silence fell over the property, the string quartet having abandoned their performance. Inside the dining room, the scene was one of perfect chaos, contained within the bounds of upper-class restraint. Guests had risen from their seats and migrated to the windows, cocktail glasses, and champagne flutes in hand, murmuring to one another as they watched the spectacle unfold. My father stood frozen at the head of the main table, speech cards still in hand, his carefully orchestrated moment of glory thoroughly derailed. Beside him, my mother's face betrayed a mixture of embarrassment and confusion, but it was James's reaction that I would remember most vividly. My brother, who had spent a lifetime dismissing my accomplishments, stood with his champagne glass suspended halfway to his lips, his expression one of absolute shock. As the reality of what he was seeing registered fully, the glass slipped from his fingers, hitting the hardwood floor with a crash and sending champagne splashing across his Italian leather shoes. The accident created a momentary distraction, but attention quickly returned to the helicopter, and by extension to me. I could feel the weight of dozens of stares as I walked confidently toward the aircraft, my heels sinking slightly into the manicured lawn with each step. The pilot emerged and gave me a professional nod. "Miss Wilson, we're fueled and ready. Estimated flight time to the Reynolds retreat is 17 minutes. "Thank you, Michael," I replied loud enough to be heard by those watching from the patio and windows. "Let me grab my purse and we can depart immediately." As I turned back toward the house, I saw that a significant number of guests had now spilled out onto the terrace, and lawn curiosity overcoming decorum. My father had finally moved from his frozen position and was making his way outside James, and my mother trailing behind him. "Samantha," my father called, his voice carrying across the lawn. "What is the meaning of this display?" I met him halfway, aware of our audience. "As I mentioned, Dad, I have an emergency meeting with Urban Development Partners. They're signing a $30 million contract with Property AI today, and the paperwork requires my in-person signature." His eyes flickered to the helicopter with its prominent company logo, then back to me. For perhaps the first time in my life, I saw something akin to reassessment in his gaze. "Urban Development Partners," he repeated slowly. "Marcus Reynolds' company." "Yes," I confirmed. "They're acquiring the lakefront portfolio in Chicago and need our predictive analytics to evaluate the assets before closing." A murmur ran through the gathered guests. The lakefront portfolio was well known in real estate circles as one of the most significant property groups in the Midwest, valued at over $1 billion. Before my father could respond, James pushed forward, his earlier shock now replaced with obvious discomfort. "That is quite the entrance, Sam," he said, attempting to sound casual, despite the champagne stains spreading across his pants. "I had no idea your little software company was doing so well." "Property AI passed little about 3 years ago," I replied evenly. "We are now the leading AI analytics platform in the real estate sector." Several of my father's business associates were openly staring now, a few nudging each other and whispering. I recognized at least 3 major property developers among them all, potential clients. My mother stepped forward, seemingly determined to salvage the situation. Samantha has always been so clever with computers, she announced to no one in particular. We always encouraged her natural talents, didn't we, Robert? The revisionist history was so blatant that I almost laughed. Instead, I smiled politely. I should get my purse from the patio. The Reynolds team is waiting. As I moved toward the house, guests parted like the Red Sea expressions, ranging from curiosity to newfound respect. I heard snippets of conversation following in my wake. Wilson's daughter, Property AI, the one that was just featured in Forbes. Heard they're revolutionizing market analysis. Valuation estimated at over $100 million. The patio guests who had previously been segregated from the main event now found themselves at the center of attention as I retrieved my belongings from our designated failure table. My second cousin Bethany gave me a thumbs up and a grin. When I re-emerged, my father was waiting near the terrace doors. His expression had shifted subtly, a calculating look I recognized from business negotiations, replacing his earlier displeasure. "Samantha," he said, lowering his voice. "Perhaps you could delay your meeting slightly. Stay for the cake cutting at least. I am sure your clients would understand a short delay for a family obligation." The request was so transparently self-serving that it took me aback. Not concern for missing family time, but concern for how my early departure might now appear to his guests, who had just witnessed the dramatic evidence of my success. "I wish I could, Dad, but in business timing is everything. I am sure you understand." I used his own values against him, watching the conflict play across his face. Before he could press further, a distinguished-looking man I recognized as the CEO of Westbrook Development Group approached us. "Robert, you never mentioned your daughter was behind Property AI," he said, clapping my father on the shoulder. "We have been looking at their analytics platform for our East Coast properties." My father's social instincts kicked in immediately. "Charles, let me properly introduce you to my daughter Samantha Wilson, founder and CEO of Property AI. The sudden pride in his voice was almost comical, given the context. Charles extended his hand to me, and we exchanged business cards with my father, looking on, clearly reassessing my value in his social ecosystem in real time. "Perhaps we could set up a meeting next week," Charles suggested. "My team would be happy to arrange that," I replied professionally. "Though, I should mention we are currently at capacity with new clients following the Urban Development Partners deal. I will see if we can prioritize Westbrook given the family connection." The subtle power shift was palpable. My father, who had seated me on the patio as an afterthought, was now witnessing business leaders he respected, treating me as a peer. James appeared at our father's elbow, his earlier mockery replaced with an awkward attempt at collegiality. "Sam has always had a great mind for innovation," he offered, as though we had been supportive siblings all along. "Wilson Properties has been considering implementing her system ourselves. Haven't we, Dad?" The blatant lie hung in the air between us. I smiled politely but did not validate his claim. "I really must be going. The pilot is waiting." With that, I said a general goodbye to the gathered guests and walked back toward the helicopter head high, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes following my every step. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone present knew it. As I reached the helicopter, I turned for one last look at the scene. My family stood grouped together on the lawn, the perfect picture of wealth and privilege against the backdrop of their estate. But now, instead of me orbiting their world and seeking entry, they were watching me depart to my own sphere of influence, one they had neither created nor controlled. Michael helped me into the aircraft, and within moments, the engine roared to life, the blades spinning into a blur overhead. As we lifted off, I saw the guests on the lawn growing smaller, their faces turned upward, watching the physical manifestation of my success rise above the world that had so often made me feel small. In that moment, flying away from my father's birthday party in my company helicopter, I felt something settle within me that had been restless for decades. It was not triumph or revenge, though there was a certain satisfaction. It was something quieter and more profound, the realization that I no longer needed their approval to know my own worth. The meeting with Marcus Reynolds was everything I had hoped for professionally. The Urban Development Partners team was impressed with Property AI's capabilities, and the contract was signed with minimal negotiation. As we shook hands to finalize the deal, Marcus mentioned something that caught me off guard. "I met your father once at a developers conference in Boston," he said casually. Brilliant traditional real estate mind. But he dismissed predictive analytics as computer games. Ironic that his daughter is revolutionizing the industry with exactly that technology. I managed a polite smile, but his words stayed with me during the return flight. The sun was setting as the helicopter approached my parents' estate, casting long shadows across the perfectly maintained grounds. The party appeared to be still in full swing, lights glowing from every window of the house. Michael's voice came through my headset. "Would you like me to land again, or continue to the helipad at your office, Miss Wilson?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to continue directly home, avoiding any further family interaction. But another part, perhaps the stronger part, wanted closure. "Please land, Michael. I will need about 20 minutes, then we can depart for the office." The helicopter descended onto the same spot as before, though, with considerably less dramatic effect now that night was falling and the guests had moved indoors. As the rotors wound down, I saw a figure emerge from the house and stride purposefully across the lawn. Even in the dimming light, I recognized my father's distinctive gait. I stepped onto the grass, smoothing my dress and squaring my shoulders before walking to meet him. His expression was difficult to read in the gathering darkness. "You made quite an impression earlier," he said when we were within conversational distance. His tone was measured, giving away little. "That was not my intention," I replied honestly. "The meeting really was urgent." "And successful, I take it." "Yes. Urban Development Partners is now our largest client to date." He nodded slowly. "Charles Westbrook cornered me for 20 minutes after you left, asking about Property AI, Stephen Morgan and David Perlman as well. Apparently my daughter is quite the topic of conversation in circles I have frequented for decades." There was something in his voice I could not quite identify. Annoyance, respect, perhaps both. "The technology speaks for itself," I said simply. "Yes, well, your dramatic exit certainly made people take notice." He glanced at the helicopter. "Your mother saved you some cake. She thought you might return." The mention of my mother reminded me of her sudden revisionist history during my earlier departure. That was thoughtful of her. "James has been telling everyone how he always believed in your vision." My father continued, a hint of dry amusement, finally breaking through his neutral tone, rather different from his usual commentary on your career choices. "I imagine so," I replied, unable to keep a trace of sarcasm from my voice. My father sighed, running a hand through his silver hair, in a rare gesture of uncertainty. "You should come inside. Your mother has been introducing you as my daughter, the tech genius, to anyone who will listen. And several eligible bachelors have been asking about you." The absurdity of the situation struck me then. After years of dismissal and relegation to the patio, one dramatic helicopter landing had transformed me from family disappointment to prized progeny. "Dad," I said, deciding direct honesty was the only approach worth taking. "I did not come back for the cake or to meet eligible bachelors. I came back to say something I should have said years ago." He raised an eyebrow, but remained silent, waiting. "For my entire life I have tried to earn your approval, to be seen as valuable in your eyes. I worked hard. I built something significant. And still today you seated me on the patio with the other failures. It hurt, as it has always hurt. But today, I realized something important." I took a breath, feeling a lifetime of stored words finally finding their release. "I do not need your approval anymore. I know my own worth. I built my company without your support or belief in me, and that has made it entirely mine. Property AI is successful not because of the Wilson name, but because of my vision and hard work." My father's expression shifted, a complexity of emotions crossing his features. "Samantha, I am not finished," I continued calmly. "I want you to know that I love you, and I always will. You are my father. But I will not continue to participate in a family dynamic that requires me to feel small, so others can feel big. From now on, I will attend family functions when I choose to, and I will expect to be treated with the same respect you would show to any successful CEO, whether I am your daughter or not. The silence that followed felt weightless, as though a lifetime of unspoken truths had finally found voice, and in doing so, had lifted a burden I had carried so long, I had forgotten it was there. My father looked at me for a long moment, his face softened by the gathering darkness. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an unfamiliar note of reflection. You know, you remind me of myself at your age. The determination, the unwillingness to accept limitations others try to impose. He paused, though perhaps with more wisdom than I had. It was not an apology, but from Robert Wilson it was as close as one might ever get. I accepted it for what it was, a small acknowledgement decades overdue. I should go, I said. I have an early meeting tomorrow. He nodded, then surprised me by extending his hand formally, as he might, to a business associate. Congratulations on the Urban Development Partners contract, Samantha. It is a significant achievement. I shook his hand, the gesture somehow more meaningful than any embrace would have been. Thank you, Dad. Happy birthday. As I turned to walk back to the helicopter, a figure emerged from the shadows near the garden path. It was my father's brother, Uncle Thomas, the family maverick who had started and lost several businesses over the years, and was generally regarded as the cautionary tale at family gatherings. Quite a show earlier, Sammy, he said with a grin. Reminded me of the time I arrived at your grandfather's retirement party on that ridiculous motorcycle. I smiled, remembering the family story of Uncle Thomas's dramatic entrance decades ago. I heard Grandpa was furious. Livid Thomas confirmed with a chuckle. But secretly impressed, I think. His expression grew more serious. I always knew you would do something remarkable, Samantha. Even when Robert and James couldn't see it. What you have built on your own terms, that is true success. His words, sincere and without agenda, touched me deeply. Thank you, Uncle Thomas. That means a lot. He patted my shoulder affectionately. Now, go on. Get back to your empire. Some of us have to stay here and finish all this expensive champagne. With a final smile, I continued to the helicopter where Michael was waiting patiently. As I settled into my seat, and the engine roared to life, I looked back at the house one last time. Through the windows, I could see the party continuing, my mother, gesturing animatedly to a group of rapt listeners, James networking with practiced charm. My father rejoining the gathering with his customary commanding presence. But something had changed. As the helicopter lifted off and the estate grew smaller beneath us, I realized that I was no longer looking back with longing at a world I could never fully join. Instead, I was seeing it from a new perspective, one that allowed me to acknowledge its place in my story without letting it define my future. The estate disappeared from view as we banked toward the city, its lights twinkling in the distance like stars. For the first time in my life, I was leaving a family gathering, feeling not diminished but expanded, not seeking validation, but carrying my own certainty. It was I realized what freedom felt like. The Urban Development Partners contract changed everything for Property AI. Within 3 months, our valuation had doubled, and we had opened a new office in Chicago to better serve our expanding Midwest client base. The work was intense, but deeply satisfying, each successful implementation of our technology, validating the vision I had held onto through years of doubt and dismissal. The helicopter incident, as it came to be known among my executive team, had taken on almost mythological status. Rachel had framed the signed contract alongside a company newsletter headline that read, "Property AI lands biggest deal," yet literally. The photo beneath it showed Marcus Reynolds and me shaking hands, both of us smiling at the camera, the success of that evening captured for posterity. What the photo did not show, what no business document could capture, was the profound personal shift that had occurred within me during that flight from my father's birthday party. I had arrived that day, still carrying the weight of childhood insecurities, still measuring my worth against my family's assessment. I had left with something invaluable, the unshakable knowledge that I no longer needed external validation to recognize my own value. This realization changed how I approached not just my family relationships, but every aspect of my life. I became more confident in business negotiations, more authentic in personal interactions, and more selective about where and with whom I spent my time. I began building what I came to think of as my chosen family, a circle of friends, colleagues, and mentors who appreciated me for exactly who I was. Natalie remained my closest confidant, the one person who had seen me through every phase of my journey. "You know what the difference is now," she observed over dinner about a month after the helicopter incident. "You carry yourself like someone who knows her worth is non-negotiable." She was right. Something fundamental had shifted, not in my circumstances but in my perception of them. This shift manifested most clearly in my evolving relationship with my biological family. For 2 months after the birthday party, I had minimal contact with my parents and James. There were a few text messages from my mother, mostly sharing links to articles about property AI that had begun appearing in major business publications. My father sent a formal email congratulating me on being named one of Forbes 40 Under, 40 in the technology sector. James remained conspicuously silent. Then, on a crisp October morning, my assistant informed me that Robert Wilson was in the lobby, asking if I had time for a meeting. I found my father standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of our reception area, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. He turned, as I approached, his expression more uncertain than I had ever seen it. "Impressive view," he said by way of greeting, though I would have expected nothing less. "Thank you," I replied simply. "Would you like to see the rest of the office?" He nodded, and I gave him the tour, watching with quiet satisfaction as he took in the sleek design of our workspace, the energy of our team members, and the wall displaying the logos of our growing client list. He asked thoughtful questions about our technology and business model, listening to my answers with genuine attention. When we reached my office, he paused before a framed photograph on my wall, the original Property AI team, just 5 of us standing in our first tiny office space, grinning with the optimism of true believers. "This was the beginning?" he asked. "Yes," I confirmed. 5 years ago." He studied the image for a moment longer. "You built something remarkable, Samantha. Something I did not understand or appreciate." He turned to face me directly. "I was wrong about that. About many things." Coming from Robert Wilson, this admission was unprecedented. I felt a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with triumph, and everything to do with a lifetime of waiting for these words. "Thank you for saying that," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. "I am not good at this," he continued, gesturing vaguely. "Acknowledging mistakes. Your mother says I am constitutionally incapable of admitting when I am wrong." A small, rueful smile crossed his face. "She is probably right about that too." We sat down in the seating area of my office, the tension between us easing slightly. "I always thought I knew what success looked like," my father said after a moment. "Buildings you could see and touch. Deals with tangible assets. I did not understand what you were creating because it did not fit my definition. That was my limitation, not yours." His words were healing in a way I had not expected, filling cracks in my foundation that I had learned to work around but had never truly repaired. "I would like us to try again," he said finally. "To build a relationship based on who we actually are, not who I thought you should be." It was a beginning, imperfect but sincere. Over the following months, we established a new pattern of interaction. Monthly lunches where we discussed business as equals. Occasional family dinners where my achievements were acknowledged alongside James's, small steps toward a healthier dynamic. James took longer to adjust to the new reality. His initial response was to increase his competitive behavior, announcing a major Wilson Properties expansion at the exact time Property AI received significant press coverage for a new algorithm. When that failed to diminish my success, he tried a different approach, sudden claims of having always believed in my potential whenever we were in public together. I neither challenged nor accepted these revisionist statements, maintaining a polite but boundaried relationship with my brother. Over time, as it became clear that my success neither threatened nor diminished his own position within Wilson Properties, his resentment began to fade, replaced by a grudging respect that occasionally hinted at the possibility of a more genuine connection in the future. My mother adapted most readily to the changed circumstances, seamlessly incorporating my success into her social narrative, as though she had always been my biggest champion. While I recognized the superficiality of this pivot, I chose to accept it with good grace, understanding that it was the only way she knew to connect. Samantha has always been so driven, she would tell her friends at charity luncheons. Even as a little girl, she knew exactly what she wanted. I would smile and let the reinvention stand, knowing that my own internal validation had made me generous in ways I could not have been before. I no longer needed her to acknowledge the years of dismissal and oversight. I had acknowledged them myself, and in doing so, had released their power over me. The true measure of my healing came not in these improved family dynamics, but in the realization that I no longer defined myself in relation to them at all. My worth was not determined by my position at the family table, or my brother's assessment, or my father's approval. It existed independently, unshakable, and self-evident. This emotional freedom allowed me to focus my energy on building the life and relationships I truly wanted. I mentored young women in technology, established a scholarship fund for girls interested in AI and computer science, and cultivated friendships based on mutual respect and genuine connection rather than obligation or status. On the anniversary of what I now thought of as the helicopter day, I received an unexpected email from my second cousin Bethany, my fellow patio exile from my father's birthday party. "Remember when they seated us with the failures," she wrote. "Turns out, the real failure was in how they measured success. Your helicopter moment inspired me to expand my yoga studio into a wellness center that just got featured in Wellness magazine. Sometimes the best view isn't from the main table, it's from 30 feet in the air, looking down at people who thought they could define your worth. Thank you for that lesson." Her message crystallized something I had been feeling, but had not fully articulated. True success includes emotional freedom, the ability to define your own path without seeking permission or approval, the courage to value yourself when others do not, the wisdom to recognize that family connections, while important, do not determine your inherent worth. As I sat in my office that evening looking out over the city lights, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From the little girl desperate for her father's approval, to the woman who had built a life and a company on her own terms. The path had not been easy or straight, but every step, even the painful ones, had been necessary. I had learned that sometimes the most powerful response to being seated on the patio is not to fight for a place at the main table, but to create your own table entirely. To build something so undeniably successful that those who once dismissed you must reconsider not just their assessment of you, but their entire metric for measuring value. And in that reconsideration, perhaps they too find room to grow beyond the limitations of their own perspectives. My father had begun that journey. James might someday follow. My mother would probably never fully understand. But their journeys were no longer my responsibility or my measure of success. My helicopter had landed both literally and metaphorically, changing not just how my family saw me, but how I saw myself. That moment of dramatic vindication had been satisfying, but the quiet certainty that followed was the true victory. The knowledge that I was enough exactly as I was, helicopter or no helicopter. In the end, that is what I want to share with all of you watching this story. Your worth is not determined by a seat at someone else's table. It is not measured by their recognition or diminished by their dismissal. It exists independently, immutably yours. So, if you find yourself relegated to the patio of someone else's expectations, remember this. Sometimes the best view is not from inside looking out, but from above looking down. with the perspective that comes from rising above limitations others would place upon you. I would love to hear your stories of moments when you realized your own worth despite others' assessments. Have you ever had your own helicopter moment when everything changed? Comment below and let me know. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too are more than enough exactly as they are. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the seat at the table you were denied becomes the launching pad for something far greater than you ever imagined.